There are some memories that can never heal me.
This is what I'm from. Born with that. Why would you do that?
Tell no one that you journey through the kingdom.
Jessica, this is Cheryl. Did you get the chat?
Yes, I responded back to it as well.
I can oh, did you? Okay. So we're not live yet. We're just showing a placeholder screen.
Okay. Yeah, because Rebecca and
Who is your part?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I said, since Rebecca and I are sharing the presentation, it may be better for us to just say next slide.
That's perfect.
Because the other thing is you don't know when we're splitting the presentation. So we'll just do that. You asked me who, you were asking me.
That's
something?
perfect.
Okay.
No, you're good. You're good. Is Rebecca going to dial in as her? Because it said guest a while ago.
It shouldn't, it will either come up as Rebecca Bennett, or it will come up as Emerging Wisdom.
Got it. Okay. No, you're good. Thank you.
Board members, if you're here, if you can turn your video on, so we can see who's ready to go. Susan, are you here? Natalie, are you here? Who are we? So we are already in session. The first order of business on our agenda is the approval and adoption of the May 12th, 2020 regular business meeting agenda. Is there a motion?
I move that we approve and adopt the May 12th, 2020 agenda.
Second, any questions or discussion? Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey Collins.
Yes.
Motion passed.
So we have a number of minutes to approve. December 19th, January 14th, February 11th, and March 10th. We need to take each one separately. Is there a motion?
Move that we approve the December 10th, 2019 regular meeting minutes.
Second, with it noted as December 19th. Questions or discussion? Ms. Lewis, roll call, please.
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey Collins.
Yes.
Motion passed.
I move that we approve the January 14th, 2020 regular meeting minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Questions or discussion? Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey Collins.
Yes.
The motion passed.
Is there a motion for the February 11th, 2020 minutes?
I move that we approve the February 11th, 2020 minutes.
Second? Questions or discussion? Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane, Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Val, Mrs. Rhodey Collins,
Yes.
motion passed.
Yes. Is there a motion for March 10th, 2020?
I move that we approve the March 10th, 2020 regular meeting minutes.
Second, questions or discussion? Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val, Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey
Yes.
Collins, the motion passed.
Yes. Dr. Adams, Superintendent's report.
Good afternoon, board and public. I'd like to go straight to the presentation. At the last board meeting, I presented to the board the final synopsis summary of the work that was done by Emerging Wisdom, community visioning and engagement results. The board requested that they come for the board to give an overview of their presentation and summary for the board to ask any kind of questions. At this point in time, I would like to thank Mrs. Bennett and Mrs. Perkins for the work that they did, and obviously want to thank the foundation for supporting the work that they did in terms of covering the bulk of the cost for this engagement. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Bennett and to Mrs. Perkins, who are already online, and they have a summary that you received yesterday or Monday, on Monday for the presentation. So without further ado, Ms. Bennett and Mrs. Perkins.
And if you don't mind, before they start, if everyone else who is not from Emerging Wisdom could please mute, that would be excellent.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing us to come before you and to share highlights from our findings. All right, so we're going to walk you through this presentation, the engagement results from our visioning session. Can you advance, please? Thank you. So we had 12 engagement events over the period of 3 weeks from February 19th to March 12th. 6 of these were community visioning workshops, and we had about 657 attendees at these workshops. We also had 6 specific audience roundtables that were attended by nearly 300 individuals. And those individuals came from both internal stakeholder groups that are connected with the district and external stakeholder groups. When we talk about internal, we mean school leaders, principals, assistant principals, and the like, teachers and students. When we talk about external stakeholder groups, we're talking about parents, clergy, and nonprofit partners. So in total, within the span of about 3 weeks, we touched about 1,000 people who participated in this process. You'll see on this chart here, the sort of demographic breakdown by our community visioning sessions. So 5 of 10, so a half of all those who participated in our community visioning workshops were SLPS employees. 3 out of 10, or close to a third, were parents who participated in the process, and they represented roughly 80 schools in the district. 7 out of 10 were women who participated, and nearly 6 out of 10 were African American who participated in the planning process. You'll also see the breakdown by visioning workshop in terms of what percentage of those 657 attendees came from which visioning sessions, with the majority of attendance in the process of participating in the Vashon listening session. If you would advance, please. So in most of our settings, we really stuck to a set of core questions that we asked in all of the settings. We asked these same core questions, though we might have placed, depending upon whether or not it was a roundtable or it was a workshop, we might have had more or less of these questions. That is to say, some of our roundtables were shorter, where we only had 45 minutes, but most of our community visioning sessions were longer. And so we asked these 5 questions. When you think of the district as it currently is, what 1 or 2 words would you use to describe it? Most people stuck to that, though several, of course, had many more things to say. So what is the current state? We also asked them, what was the desired future state? So when you imagine a system of excellent schools, what comes to mind? We then asked, to achieve the system that they want, what would need to be priorities or focal points for the district, priorities and areas of transformation? So here's where we are today, here's where we want to be tomorrow, and what are going to have to be the priorities to get us there? We also shared what the district's criteria for school closure and consolidation had been in the past, and asked those who participated in the process to comment on those criteria, to say whether or not they agreed or disagreed, and what else they believe the district should be considering as it makes these decisions or seeks to make these decisions. And then lastly, we asked people what might be done, what they thought might be done to lessen the impacts of school closures on district stakeholders and communities at large, and the communities that they serve. Advance, please. In the very first question, when we asked about describing the district as it currently is, we got more than sort of 800 descriptors from that provocation or that line of inquiry. And 9 of 10 of those descriptors were really perceptions about systems, the district as a system, or about the people that comprise the system. So the perception of the system, you see this word cloud. The thing that really struck with most of our participants was how under-resourced the district is, so I think there's a widespread acknowledgement that the district does not necessarily have what it needs to thrive. And so under-resourced and struggling were 2 of the most prominent words and repeated words. We also heard inequitable. There's some real concern about whether or not there's educational equity in the district, and there's a sense that there is not, and so that there needs to be more emphasis on equity for this district as a part of its success, as a part of its transformation. There are other words that you will see that came up, and you can tell by the size of the word how frequently it was repeated. So bigger words represent those that came up more often in public comment. Perceptions of the people, right? A lot of emphasis on the district serving a diverse community, being comprised of a diverse community, being inclusive, being passionate, folks who are serving, being passionate, being hopeful. But there's also this piece on concern about the level of professionalism and engagement there by district staff, this concern about being underserved, and largely with regard to students and families. And then other kinds of things that came up that were mentioned that you'll see in smaller letters or in smaller print around those perceptions. Please advance. A small portion of the comments as we heard about them were really about perceptions of outcomes, right? What comes on the other end of this educational experience? And there's a real desire to see the district get stronger here. There is some note that the district is improving, or there are areas where improvement is taking place. But again, that term around inequitable came up again, or failing or disappointing or underperforming, really wanting to see transformation. That is something that is shared not only by the district's leadership, but is also shared by the communities that you are serving, or that our district is serving. So a desire to see some real improvement here, stronger improvement and transformation in terms of the district's educational outcomes. Please advance. So that was the first question. Tell us about the district as you understand it currently. And then we also said, tell us about the district as you'd like to see it, as you hope. This was after all a visioning process. And there were sort of 5 buckets of things that came up repeatedly. When people think of an excellent school system, they think about high quality staff, highly qualified staff. They think about improved physical, social, and emotional environment for students and faculty. They think about enhanced culturally responsive curricula, given the student body and the families being served. They think about engaged parents and families, and they think about equitable practices, right? So those were the things that came up consistently in terms of what we heard. There's some additional detail there with regard to each one of these line items. So really in the qualified staff, wanting to see our school leaders empowered and our teachers well-trained, and making sure that our teachers and our leaders are trauma informed and have the kind of training about how to be effective with the students that they are teaching and whose development they are responsible for. In the improved physical and social and emotional environment, really wanting to make sure that school environments are welcoming and culturally responsive, and that there are equitable school policies and operations that really support and reinforce that. Really wanting to see from a curricula standpoint, rigorous and challenging curricula that prepares students for the opportunities that are ahead for them and for life, and wanting that to reflect students' ethnicity and cultural and learning styles. So wanting that to be integrated as a part of that. Really wanting to see parents as partners in the district's work and in the work of learning and education, and wanting families to really be treated as valuable members of the school community. And then a real emphasis, which comes up in many different contexts here, on equity and equitable practices, particularly around resource distribution with regard to our academic offerings and how students are, what expectations they have, how students are disciplined, how classrooms are managed. So in every aspect of educational function, really wanting to see equity be centered. The third question that we asked is, if you've told us sort of where our district is and you've told us where you'd like to see us go, then what is going to have to be the bridge to help us get there? And those are the priorities. There were 10 priorities that came up. You'll see the percentages there are associated with the number of small groups in our community visioning sessions that said that this was a priority. So 92%, we did our facilitation in small breakout groups. 92% of all of those breakout groups said that a top priority was teacher quality and retention, followed by making sure that there were increased student supports and services, again, an emphasis on enhanced curricula and parent and family involvement, and investment more in neighborhood schools, seeing a distinction between what happens in magnet school settings and what happens in neighborhood school settings, and really wanting to see the strengthening of neighborhood schools. A recognition that policy advocacy is going to be key for the district to be able to get the kind of resourcing that it needs in order to do the heavy lift that it has before it. A commitment to strong school leadership and to community partnerships that really help meet student needs, that what the district needs isn't just within its walls, but is also outside of its walls through partnerships that community can stand up and help support, making sure that our students are ready for college and careers, and having the kind of technology and digital literacy that really prepares students for the rigors of the digital economy in which they're going to find themselves. Next slide, please. So those were the priorities. We asked people, share with us your thoughts about the criteria in the past that the district has used. Tell us what you think. Tell us what else you think needs to be considered. What you'll notice from these red and green columns is that there was some support for the closure factors that the district has used in the past, but there was really some disagreement with these criteria alone being what drives decision-making. And you'll see that by those red columns. From an academic performance standpoint, there was a concern that just performance by itself didn't take into consideration the many variables that impact performance. And that could be family environment or teacher quality, or the way in which the district is structured around choice and around neighborhood schools and those sorts of things, that there are factors that are beyond students' controls, family controls, and even faculty controls that might influence academic performance. And is that a fair yardstick for whether or not a school should stay open or should be closed or consolidated? On the feeder pattern front, there was some question about whether or not feeder patterns as we know them really exist, given the focus on choice already, and whether or not those patterns have really been disrupted so significantly, so much so already. And then this question about building conditions, there was some work, some thinking there around deferred maintenance, and that has really resulted in poor conditions in a number of the buildings that we have. And if that's the case, should we be closing down those buildings or looking for other solutions? So to every criteria, community members thought about it thoughtfully and then presented some additional considerations that they wanted the district to take, that they wanted the district to give some attention to as it decides what should be its focus in terms of making these decisions. In addition, beyond the criteria that the district has used in the past, they made some recommendations for other things the district should consider when making these decisions. So A, making sure that it uses a racial equity lens in making decisions about closure. B, focusing more on what students and families want, right? And integrating that into its decision-making. And then helping the public understand of the factors that the district will use, what is most weighted? Are the factors that the district has used in the past, are they equally weighted? Or are there some things that are more important than other things? And being as transparent as possible about that was a request. Next slide, please. So those things were a part of a sort of general high-level critique. More specifically, the other things that community members talked about wanting to see our board and district leaders consider as they make decisions were, what are going to be the impacts on neighborhoods? Are neighborhoods going to be further destabilized by closure decisions? What are going to be the cultural and historical significance of any closures? So considering and respecting the past and the contributions of the schools, and thinking about that as a part of the decision making is, you know, what role does this institution play in the cultural or historical landscape? Student and staff morale, what might be the impact on students and staff? Parent and family impacts. So how well will parents and families be able to adjust, to connect to new schools, to access them, to get there? That shows up in the transportation and travel concerns. If part of what Dr. Adams shared in his presentation was, I think the first, there are students who get on the bus as early as 5 a.m. or close to that, right? And there are routes that might be as long as an hour and a half or 75 minutes. So will closures and consolidations result in even greater transportation times and greater distances between where students live and the schools that educate them? And then this concern about student safety, whether or not student safety would be compromised when through closure and putting students in schools where there might be other kinds of community conflicts or other things going on, turf issues, or just other things that undermine student safety and well-being. So some concern about that. Next slide, please. The last question that we asked was about how to lessen the negative impact of school closures. And what we heard from community members was what is absolutely, absolutely, absolutely key from all 100% of the small groups that participated, and those small groups comprise more than 679 people or 600 and some odd people, was provide timely, transparent, and honest communication. about what the district is intending to do and when it will do it, right? So that is really key to help people prepare, plan, adjust, and in other ways, consider other options. Develop a plan for closed schools. So if schools are going to be closed, what is the plan for them so that they do not contribute to neighborhood blight and destabilization? Ensure that closure really results in transformation for the district. So if the case that is being made is that closure will enable the district to transform its educational outcomes and function in considerable ways, deliver on that promise, right? Use the resources that are saved to really bring about quality shifts in the district's performance and in student achievement. And then lastly, do the best you possibly can on facilitating a smooth transition for staff in the district and for students and families, right? So that this does not lead to even greater retention issues with families sort of defecting from the district. But we are really as helpful and customer oriented as possible in helping students and staff be able to transition well. Next slide, please. So that came out of those community visioning sessions. The next section is really on what came out of our roundtable sessions, where we connected with another 350 people, I think. Jessica?
It was roughly 300.
Okay, thank you.
All right, good evening. This is Jessica Perkins. I am going to spend a little bit of time kind of giving you some background on what we heard from the roundtables. Can you please advance the slide? Thank you. So we engaged approximately 300 people in the roundtables. Our externals, and that's that dark green outer circle, were of course the nonprofits, where we had 33 individuals, and then faith-based or clergy, we had 65. We somewhat put parents and family members as an interim between internal and external, because they're not exactly totally internal and they're not totally external. And then we had our internal audiences were students, teachers, and principals. This entire group of folks basically comprised about 30% of the total number of individuals that we engaged during the process. Please advance. All right, so one of the things that I attempted to do was, once we had written the community visioning document, I actually started going back and forth, looking at the roundtables to see how each of them differed or were the same as what was heard at the community visioning sessions. Additionally, when I started sitting down looking at this information from an internal versus external audience, I did the same thing. And as you can see, just to kind of note here, in the first line about well-funded schools, you notice that it is bolded. You will notice through all of the information that you will see in these tables, if the text is bolded, that means that 2 or more of the audiences actually made that statement. So as you can see, the district excellence looks like well-funded schools. Parents, teachers, and students stated that. So I'll just go through and talk about the bulleted ones. Basically, you know, people want well-funded schools with resources distributed equitably, with a high quality of teachers that are not only supported, but they are praised and given autonomy to do work in their classrooms. They would like to have both in-class and out-of-class support. In order to retain high quality teachers, both principals and teachers spoke about having highly competitive salaries and benefit programs so that the high quality teachers would not leave and go to other districts in the area. And then all 3 groups, students included, wanted rigorous and broad academics that would be relevant to their either their college or career preparation. And so that they would be able, through that, specifically the students wanted just a broader mix of not only electives, but after school activities. Next slide, please. Additionally, as you see here, you've got a couple other statements about district excellence where 2 or more of the internal groups spoke about that. I already spoke about the equitable nature of it. Principals, teachers, and students want safe and welcoming schools. I found it quite interesting in this that the principals, and I know this specifically came from principals, they wanted to see a camera security at the elementary level. Everyone spoke about well-behaved students, and I'm saying even the students spoke about well-behaved students. Of course, they want full support with full-time nurses, social workers, college counselors, behavioral counselors as well. And I found it quite interesting that both the principals and the students, and more importantly, the students stated, we want our parents to support us. We want them to be there to help us to move forward and not to undermine our academics. And those are the major areas of district excellence in agreement that these 3 internal audiences had. If you'll go to the next slide, please. And here we have the priorities, very similar to the priorities that Rebecca spoke about in the community visioning sessions. I think the one that stands out here that's probably a little different from that is the whole notion of renovate and/or build state-of-the-art schools, which is near the bottom. I found that was quite interesting because both teachers and students wanted facilities that had basically what they wanted later on in life. As an example, I had one student to say to me, I want the version of a D1 campus, but smaller. In other words, I want specific buildings for like math and science, or I want a specific building for this. And I also want to make sure that we have the athletic fields that we need. So that was stated by both principals and students. And then of course, the safety issue as a priority came up as well when we started looking at ways to focus on district excellence. Next slide, please. Partnership and community support came from both principals and teachers. There is a definite need for having equitable distribution of partnerships, community partnerships across the board at all schools. And that is critical not only for supporting principals and teachers, but also students. It's likely that the students didn't mention it in this case is because they don't necessarily know about the partners that come into various schools. Next slide, please. Here we have the external audiences. As I said to you before, parents kind of are in the ring between external and internal, but we have parents, nonprofit, and clergy. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but look at the bolded ones. High achieving, high academic performance students, also high quality and competitively compensated principals and teachers. And then having that whole notion of support is very important. And then, of course, the rigorous curricula that not only approaches learning differently, but it includes STEM literacy, having that strong, not only gifted program, but the strong special education program, as well as strong college counseling programs. Now, the interesting thing, and I'm going to share this, is that one of the things that was a little different is that this particular group, the external audiences, came up and said, one of the ways that we define district excellence is by the particular outcome of all children achieving. I found it quite interesting that in all of the roundtables, very few of them spoke about outcomes. When we asked about district excellence, they didn't speak specifically about the outcome of high-performing children. They spoke about all of the things that go into it, the elements to make an excellent district. And I found it quite interesting. And it was so interesting to me that I actually went back through all of the summaries to find out, okay, am I imagining this? And it was, like I said, very few of the groups really spoke about that one outcome. So that's something to keep in mind as you go forward with transformation. Why are we doing everything that we're doing? So that we can have children that are achieving to their highest and best. Next slide, please. Here we have just two that were bolded, looking at not only the physical and social wellness of the students, but also the staff. We heard that quite a bit. Interesting here is the fact that an external audience actually spoke about physical and social wellness of staff and students. And then the last one, just having the involvement from parents. Next slide, please. And here we have the priorities. The same kind of sense here was, again, if you see them bolded, that means two or more of the external audiences stated that. No difference here of all of those that are bolded. I think the difference for me that came up was that second bullet where it says creating a thriving partnership program with nonprofits and the city. I found it quite interesting that not only did the nonprofit or community partners speak of that, but both parents and clergy. So everyone wants to look at the district from the standpoint of how can we bring in additional supports and partnerships to support this district. All the other items that are bolded here are things that you have heard before, either in the community visioning piece. I think also that almost last bullet is important when you start thinking about one of the ways to build trust is to be transparent and communicate to your audiences. And of course, that was stated by both parents and clergy. Next slide, please. And I'll turn it back over to Rebecca to give the next steps.
Right, so really the next steps are yours to determine, but what we heard through our community visioning and roundtable sessions was 4 things that really stood out, right? Let's make sure that there's a transition plan and continue to see community feedback, that this shouldn't be one and done through this visioning process where it's intense community listening up front, but that is not a behavior or a posture that is continued beyond the visioning back. Share that plan with staff, students, families, and community partners. Invite ongoing communication with your stakeholders and community members. We also heard that it's really important to advance accountability and equity here, right, is what happens next. So really be clear about what the district's priorities are and make the case for how closures and consolidations today keep the district from experiencing the same level of crisis 3 to 5 years from now, where it's having to make a similar set of really difficult decisions around how many schools it is operating and are functioning. So, right, how will the actions taken today strengthen the district's overall performance and stability and help transform its outcomes? Making that case clear. We heard from Dr. Adams in his presentations. He talked about some of the priorities he has, and looking and hearing from the board of priorities are, it really able to sort of make it clear to students, to staff, and to others, these are the priorities for transformation for this district. And if we invest in them now, these are the outcomes that we anticipate, and this is how we're better off, not just today, but in the foreseeable future. The public wants to hear that case. And the public wants to make sure that improved educational outcomes are going to be delivered, particularly for those who might be adversely impacted by closures. So how will learning be different? How will the quality of education be different for those who might be further disadvantaged by closures and consolidation? So they want the district to deliver, and that's the advancing accountability and equity. There was also some repeated sort of focus on undertaking phased closures if they're going to need to be significant closures. there was a desire to see that happen over time rather than see that sort of happen all at once. So, and there was an emphasis that phase closures would help preserve culture and lessen negative impacts and give the community time to adjust, prepare, and then, if possible, pursue better options where possible. And then lastly, I think from a moving forward standpoint, what we heard was how important it is for the district to maintain stewardship of closed schools that don't necessarily have a clear buyer or new occupant identified. So what the public didn't want to see was schools being closed and becoming vacant buildings that further destabilize neighborhoods and communities that have already experienced historical and contemporary divestment, right? They didn't want the district to contribute to that. And so what could the district do to help maintain those properties until such time as ownership is transferred? Or what could be done to consider innovative ways to repurpose those buildings, perhaps through community partnerships that could help address the needs of the students and the families served or of the surrounding neighborhoods. So those were the things that we heard from community high level about what might be the next steps in this process. So thank you for giving us this opportunity to serve in this way. We are appreciative of the journey and we are open for any questions or comments.
I guess I'll start. I have a couple of questions, and they might be more for Dr. Adams, maybe than the Empowering Wisdom Group, so apologize if that's the case. I read through the reports and also went through and sort of identified some of the themes, and I appreciate your bringing them to light in this very clear way. I am wondering, I guess a couple of things. So one would be, what kind of plan do we have to address these sort of themes around highly qualified staff and safety and family engagement, improving student services? And if we don't have one right now, what is the plan to make a plan, I guess, or what are the steps that SLPS will be taking to create a plan to address these things?
Obviously, we are in the midst of COVID-19, and as I indicated at the last board meeting or 2 board meetings ago, the plan right now is to pause, to wait to determine after we get school up and running what we do around this entire Emerging Wisdom community visioning engagement results, with the idea that we're looking to come back to the board in October with a recommendation that will likely address the notion of staff and safety and all the kinds of things that you are framing. But I think what's important in this presentation is this is not going to be like turning a light switch on. It won't go from where it is now to dramatically where everybody wants it to be tomorrow. It is a process that will take place that involves possibly additional compensation for staff, different options for students. And so at this point in time, Mrs. Miller, what we're doing is obviously like anyone else, we're looking at the data and the results, but we are thrust right now in the notion of closing out this school year before we begin a detailed conversation in June around this presentation, as well as a recommendation that might come before the board in October.
Thank you. Just to sort of follow up and tie it into the school closures conversation that was sort of being discussed at the end, I'm wondering what the sort of idea is around school closures right now, or I know it was something that we were holding these workshops in order to sort of discuss, and then is that also on pause right now until after the COVID, or until a specific date?
So one of the reasons for not moving aggressively forward after we received the information from Emerging Wisdom, one of the clear recommendations is this notion of transparency. It is very difficult to be transparent when persons can't come out of their homes and they can't engage in a real meaningful way. And so that was probably one of the overarching pieces for me to say pause, because I really want to be transparent around this. Historically, what has occurred is that decisions have been made and it and the view has been that it's not been transparent. One of the things that might impact that, Ms. Miller, for me to come back to the board, might be the fiscal climate of what's happening in the state and the country. If we are positioned at our next board meeting in July with a budget that is dramatically impacted what's occurring, then it will be my obligation to come back to the board to look at this notion of closure earlier than the time period that I might want to. But at this point in time, based on the data I have, and it's not all complete, I would not be making a recommendation to the board in October. If something changes in terms of the fiscal climate of the country, i.e. and the state funding and district city funding, then I might be coming back to the board as early as July with some recommendations that might address one of the recommendations that came out of here, some stepped out closures. In other words, looking at what might happen as early as 2020-21, what might happen as early as 2021-22, and then 22-23. So it might be over a phase or a period of time. But I want to be clear here, it is not my recommendation today for that. It is my recommendation today to wait until I understand better around the fiscal climate and to move from that point. I think I want to make it clear because I think the ladies did an excellent job of lifting this up. This really just can't be around the dollars and cents. It really just can't be around the dollars and cents. That's one of the impacts, but if we make decisions just around the dollars and cents, I think we do a disservice to the work that has gone on before and to this community.
Thank you. I 100% agree. And to that end, or sort of relatedly, I wonder if some of the things that are in these themes might be addressed before we actually do sort of like get through the COVID situation, especially not knowing how long that's going to last. So when we were talking about like highly qualified staff and retention and morale and support and being treated like professionals, and some of the ideas around equity and resourcing and how we're thinking about that, I do sort of wonder if these themes might be worked into our response to the COVID situation, especially considering that it feels like in the fall, no one knows right now if schools will be back in session or if we'll have part in session and part at home, or if that'll be an option. And so I guess my question is there a way that we feel like we plan to address these themes in the past COVID world?
Yes, ma'am. I think there are some small ways we will look to do that. And I'll just give one example. And one of the ones that I think I was asked at the last board meeting around the notion of technology. And to date, we have provided this community with over 11,000 technology units, whether that's a hotspot or an iPad. And so the question really comes from an equity perspective. How do we make sure that we're providing this to all of our kids who have the greatest need for it? And so to your point, we are looking at trying to address some of the equity issues that have come out by looking at some of our resources and how we align those resources in light of the COVID conversation. And so the answer to the question is yes. I want to be clear though, it's not going to be dramatic in the sense that people are going to see it and walk away thinking that we've done a great work on this work around equity, but you will see us trying to be intentional around providing resources that kids and families likely would not have in light of where we are around this COVID pandemic. And so to answer the question is yes, we will try to call them out for the community and for the board so that you can see what they look like. Another example might be the notion of, as we look at summer school, we've always had this issue around summer school and hiring staff based upon the rate of pay, which would be the lowest rate of pay. What we're looking at in this case is hiring the best teachers for summer school, whether that's virtual or brick and mortar, by paying them their regular salary. That is an equity issue, but that's also about selecting the best people to do the work as opposed to paying people at whatever the rate is, which is $25.52 for a teacher. So I'm throwing those things out as some examples of what we're looking at to try to address this equity issue. And it won't be substantial across all parties, but we are looking to try to address this equity issue by in the notion of the COVID-19 in small ways that we think might have some impact.
I appreciate that. And if there are like information or some kind of plan that addresses specifically these themes in relation to what we're doing, what our plan is, I would love to see that information.
Yes, ma'am.
So first, I would like to thank Dr. Rebecca and your staff for all the work that you did in pulling this together. I really like the long report and just the detail that went into the data around that. Before I ask my question, I know President Rhodey Collins, you asked us for suggestions and requests after our last work session. So there were, I think, a couple of questions within my request. I just don't know, has that been passed along to Empower or the superintendent, or should I just go ahead and ask those now?
Yes, all that was passed along last week or the week before.
Yes, Mr. Lang, I received it and I forwarded to Mrs. Bennett and to Mrs. Perkins. So they did receive your information. Matter of fact, the entire board's information prior to them putting their presentation together. So they should have a copy of it.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and ask my question. One of the requests that I had, and it seemed like this was a sentiment of a majority of the board, was as we move forward with this, whenever that may be, is to think about best practices and how we continue to keep the community engaged and moving forward. Obviously, there will be and needs to be a plan that comes from the district that the board should review and approve. But since this is a decision or will be a decision that affects our community, we want to make sure that the community is engaged in a meaningful way. So my question is just, what would you all recommend as some best practices around engaging? Because I know before that was a topic that came up from our board, and having certain conversations, what's the best way to do it, or some just good ways to make sure voices are heard and people are part of the conversation and influencing the decision-making process.
Thank you for that question. I have a couple of thoughts about the way to move forward, largely based upon what we heard from participating community members, was that they actually liked the format and the forum that we provided. So there was a desire to see more forums for meaningful community engagement, which is not to say that the public hearing process that you all have is not useful, but looking for other ways where you can really enter into dialogue and conversation with others who are stakeholders in the system and with decision makers, as many of you participated in that process, including district internal stakeholders, teachers, staff, principals, parents, right, community members, all together. So what I heard and saw was a desire for continued interaction around the fate of the district by multiple parties sharing the same space in a way that was generative and thoughtful, right? So it allowed people to source solutions and ideas and not just respond to a set plan. That stated, I also heard desires for what is the plan, right? And so I think that in the near term, as the district firms up what its priorities are based upon what it understands to be best practice in educational space, right? Because there are ways in which you have access to information that many of us might not. What is it that you know is best practice in educational space that really works and is transformative? What is it that community has said is really strong priority, right? For it, and how do both of those things get overlaid with racial equity, right? Somehow a plan that contains community priority, what district knows is best practice and effective, and that has a racial equity orientation based upon what consistently kept coming out, creates the basis for this is the transformation that we as a district are embarking upon. And these are the things that we intend to stand up through that transformation, right? These are the impacts that we want to make or that we are committed to. When there's clarity around that, I think the public would really welcome the opportunity to hear that. So Dr. Adams' presentation in the past, people got a lot of information out of that. and learned a lot, even if they disagreed and had dissenting perspectives. That access to information was key, right? And there were many people who said, oh, I've seen things, or I've understood things about how the district is functioned that I never knew before, right? So that level of being able to present information or findings, being able to ask the public to weigh in on those, using forums as an opportunity for that thinking, and forums that are multi-stakeholder type, right? Because there's a way in which it elevates the thinking and provides a level of connectivity that doesn't typically happen. I think would definitely be meaningful. There are other ways to get public opinion and feedback that are indirect ways through surveys and other kinds of things. But part of what made this work was the high touch nature. And while I do have an external engagement firm, I don't necessarily think that it necessarily requires an external engagement firm to adopt an engagement orientation to this. So what are the opportunities for community conversation around key areas of district decision-making, right? And having the district and the superintendent identify those areas for meaningful public discussion, deliberation, and learning. You can look at your calendar already, right, in some ways, and say, we're gonna probably need to have some discussions that the public's involved in around getting back into sort of post-COVID, and I put post in air quotes, right? Because we know that there's a June wave, we know that there's probably a fall wave, right? So it's not post, but what does it take for the public to be engaged? What does it take for the public to feel confident? What does the public need to know? How do we need to involve the public in our thinking and deliberations? Like, you can now start standing up those community conversations. That can be something that happens with a certain degree of regularity, right? And that can happen internally, so that these are conversations, but you have the mechanisms internally. There's the principals gathered, there's the there's a student body that gathers. I think you've got mechanisms internally to get internal stakeholder input. It is the opportunity for external and internal stakeholder conversation and dialogue around critical areas of decision-making that I think is what presents itself in a way that is not a public hearing, but in a way that allows for forum interaction, dialogue, and reflection, both on the issues themselves and on your decision-making around the issues. That was a long-winded answer, but hopefully.
Thank you, Dr. Bennett. And then I had another question. It's a short, or maybe not, yes or no, or maybe later question, so I don't need a direct answer to it. But I know that, from the board perspective and from the district perspective, we can tend to take a certain view, an internal view. From the outside looking in, as you all were compiling and looking at the priorities, do you see any priorities that might be, again, as we plan and ahead for the future, do you see any priorities that might be in conflict of one another? And to use a bad analogy, like saying that I want to start a garden but use less water, those might be two things that might be in conflict. Do you see any priorities like that for this task?
That is a very good question. I am looking, now at the big report. To see, let me just say, I don't see direct conflict. I do see fundamental tension. I do see tensions, right? I see tensions with, no one said we want to dial back progress with magnet schools. Like, nobody said that. They didn't say that. At the same time, so we didn't get calls to eliminate choice. But at the same time, we also want to make sure we like what choice brings, and we want to build up the base. right? So, and the way that is often experienced is that the advent of choice really destabilized the base, what we might call neighborhood schools, right? So there's a desire for a both and, that given your current set of realities, right? Fiscal realities, policy realities become more challenging to achieve and might present conflicts in your decision-making, even while the public says, we want it all, right? We want to have our neighborhood schools deliver high quality educational excellence. And we also understand the value of specialized schools, right? We want to maintain, to the extent that we can maintain feeder patterns, we want to do that, but we also know that the advent of choice disrupted feeder patterns. Like we want to, right? So there are these places where there is tension. And the question is, how do you resolve that? How do you resolve that tension when you don't have an infinite set of resources? That is where the conflict arises. So I don't see, Board Member Ling, I don't see the conflict that arises is, what do you do with limited resources? That is the conflict. That is the fundamental conflict that arises. Because quite honestly, in looking at this and having participated in the district's earlier planning process, having looked at the transformation pillars, there's very little that the public has said that really represents a deviation from what is already captured in much of the transformation pillars. In many ways, what the public has said is a reinforcement. In many ways, it is a reinforcement. But the issue is that it would like to see it move from plan into actual educational experience and outcome. And that requires a massive infusion of resources. And this process is seeking to figure out, how do you get that infusion of resources, which might will in fact mean that there is pain in the short term to get transformation in the long term. And there's a fear that that transformation might not be delivered. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, but it is what I have noticed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask a question, please.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to know, I sat in on 5 of the workshops.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just concerned that I didn't see any type of recording going on. Did you guys record this? And if so, where can the public go to view the recording? Because this was a lot of good information that you have put together. And it's a lot to digest in just a few minutes that you've been able to deliver what you have. You really want to go through it. I'd like to look at it over, listen to it over and over again, but just from the, since I didn't see anything being recorded, I did record some things on my phone.
Oh, good.
And I have about 10 pages of questions that I heard from the groups, from the people in the groups, because I was really concerned. They were very emotional. And I just wanted to remember everything that they were saying. So I just really want to know if there is a place where the public can go to listen to, view, or hear the results of your findings, because this is very valuable.
Thank you so much. We did not visually record it. That was not a part of our scope of agreement. But what we did was, as you were in our processes, we took copious notes. And so in that big document that you have, that's 143 pages, we put in that document all of the notes that came off the flip charts for every small group conversation. So that people could see both the synthesized document, the first 40 pages that has our conclusions, but they could also see more specifically what was said. in each of those small groups. So that document, I believe, is made public on your website in its entirety for people to find. And the same thing is true in those roundtable reports. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't just give you our analysis or synthesis, but we also gave you the notes that we took from what was said directly in those sessions so that people could draw their own conclusions.
I think the reason why I asked you that question is because one thing that I heard over and over again asked in the workshop was people, they talked about all the wonderful things that were going on in St. Louis Public School, but we weren't getting they said we weren't promoting. And you said, don't use the word advertisement. I wasn't sure if it was you or the other lady said, let's not say advertising, let's say promote. We weren't promoting the district like we needed to, or getting that information out about what's really going on so that people can become more hopeful about where we're going in the future.
So I don't know which group you were referring to. It could have been one of my groups. I did a lot of these. It could have been Jessica's. It could have been anyone with any number of our facilitators. I do know that there is a desire to see a campaign, as it were, and this is language that I am using as an interpretation, but a real desire to see a different story or narrative around the district, right? Around what is working in the district, about what the positive outcomes are. I mean, you'll notice even in the, describe the district as it is today, a lot of that was like, it's under-resourced, it's struggling, right? It's not, there was no sort of attribution of malice. It's like the district has a heavy lift and it doesn't have all of what it needs to do that lift. Right. But even in the midst of that, part of that was it's improving. Like what is the story? What is the narrative of improvement that is there? So I do echo that what you heard is something that we heard too, about a desire for a more positive narrative around the district, a better story, or at least a more comprehensive story that's told to help counteract much of the negative perspective. So I would hope that you all, as a part of thinking through what are the priorities for transformation, perhaps that would be one of the components that you settle on too, in addition to the sort of critical core educational functions, is how do we tell the story about what the district is doing in ways that not only inspire confidence, but reflect in more substantive ways all of what the district is doing to really advance educational excellence and opportunity. That's a story that's still waiting to be told. Thank you.
Dr. Bennett, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Number one, again, thank you guys so much for this presentation and all the hard work that you guys put in. And so just to kind of go back to what Donna was saying, it's important for us to, have transparency around what we're doing as a district. And so I noticed that at the end of the workshops that I attended, that, people were able to take pictures of the information that was on the board. Did anybody on your team take pictures? And if they did take pictures, are you guys willing to put that or post that as well, along with what was transcribed out of that?
We took some pictures, just as for me, I take pictures of everything that I do so that I can make sure that I get the information in the event that I lose the actual sheets, right? Or that something happens. I basically have an insurance policy. I do not know whether or not all of the facilitators that we have took pictures, but it is something that I can do to request whether or not there are any photos of those documents, and if so, to make them available to the district. But I will not say that it was the practice of everyone to do it, though it has been my practice to do it.
Got you. And thank you so much for your response. And just to add on, I know that you were speaking of, us telling a story. And I definitely agree with you about this whole community conversation piece, which is what we actually practiced years ago, where we had the superintendent on a live discussion and basically answering questions from the community, which turned out to be extremely effective. But what I would say though, instead of us working to tell a story or to make sure that a certain narrative is happening, we need to be talking about the real action that this district is taking to actually, answer some of these issues that we're dealing with right now, instead of trying to create a narrative, actually, say what we're doing that's, happening right now, not trying to create a story.
Yeah, and perhaps it is my choice of language that is not the best. I am not advocating that you create a fiction, because that's not helpful. So when I use the language of narrative or story, what I'm really talking about is ways of communicating what the district is doing that are impactful. That's really what I'm talking about, because this district is struggling under the weight of perceptions that it is failing by many who say the district isn't doing enough, the students aren't learning enough, right? And there is more that can be done. And I think while there might be agreement that there is more that can be done and should be done, I also don't think that most people know what is being done. So when I talk about narrative, I'm really talking about how to tell that. What is the district doing, so that there is more information and more understanding about the operating conditions of the district and the actions of the district. Because I think many of the people who participated in the process were also surprised about the operating conditions of the district. Right? They did not know that the district is laboring under some requirements that other districts don't have to. They didn't know that the cost of transportation is 3 times the cost, right? They didn't know that there was a lot that people don't know shape the decisions that you all have to make. And they are things that you are aware of, but they are not necessarily things that even the average parent might be aware of. So I think the information about what are the operating conditions, but also here's what we're doing is key as a part of talking about the district and its work, its prime directive, right? Its impacts. And quite honestly, this district, unfortunately, and so I want to say this about narrative, and then I'll step back to, right? We cannot underestimate the role that race plays in perceptions of our district. And so I really want to say that there has been a sustained undervaluing of public education. And that a lot of that undervaluing of public education has been because those who are being served by public education, in our case, and in many cases, largely Black and Brown students and families, are often considered undeserving. Right, and that there are dominant narratives around how we learn or don't learn. Those are unfair perceptions that I think all districts, particularly urban districts, end up struggling under. So to the extent that we can tell another story there too, shine a light on a different truth, on the families and the teachers and the students, and our ability to learn and excel when given the same quality opportunities, that is an important story, and it's an important truth. So thank you for giving me a moment to stand on my high horse around that.
Thank you, Dr. Bennett. We're on the same page with that, so thank you again.
So I really appreciated the level of detail that went into the report. It felt like I was there in every workshop or in every room, just with the level of detail in the addendum to all the different segments of the report. And in particular, was really struck by the, transparency and candor of the student report. And I think, I've come back to this report, the student roundtable report, a number of times. And so I appreciate how well you were able to capture what the students who participated were thinking and feeling about the district. And I think in line with the bigger report, how the community is really asking that we center those voices, I think is truly important. And in particular, because the things that have been identified here factors that are limiting to their success they're not asking, I heard you mention the idea of like a D1 campus, which is in here clearly, but overall the things that they're asking for, they're not asking for the world, they're asking for the things that we would expect all students to be able to receive. And I think using that as the centering piece and hearing Dr. Adams say, like, this isn't just about dollar and cents really resonates with me, because what we're looking to do is not just like save money and put it in the bank, right? We're looking to reallocate resources in a way that is equitable to deliver on these things that students are asking for. And it feels to me that there really is an opportunity here to deliver on the students, what they're asking for, the qualities of excellence and the qualities of equity that the students in particular are asking for. We have an opportunity to do that if we didn't have quite so many school buildings, right? And so if we can center these voices of the students here, we can give them things like more foreign language, more AP classes, looking at computer lab in every building. These are the things that the students are begging us for. We have the opportunity to provide that if we can reallocate some of the resources in the district, particularly targeted to those things. And I was also struck by the way that there were so many places in the report and in kind of the presentation that you gave tonight that showed that students, teachers, and principals really are on the same page in so many ways. And I think that is important too, because clearly the students are number one, families going along with that, but also the people who are working with our students. And so centering all of that and the fact that they're in alignment feels really important to me. So I think there's a real opportunity for the district to target all of those things. So all of that to say, I appreciate the level of detail that went into this, because some of the takeaways for this are striking and important and really give us a clear direction on how we might leverage potential school closures to reallocate some resources.
Good evening, Dr. Bennett. I'd like to echo the sentiments of my colleagues as well, and pay tribute to the fact that your team made it possible for the community to feel empowered to be honest about what they want in a district of excellent schools. So again, thank you for that hard work.
Thank you. I wanted to add that the comment about the students, I think I'm so glad you pulled out that they weren't asking for the world. So the D1 is an exception, right? They just said, can we have, can all of our schools have access to technology that's current? Right. I mean, that many of the requests were not asking for the moon. It was consistency, right? Consistency or access or quality that was being asked for, which is within the purview, right? With the proper resourcing, it is within the purview to be able to deliver. So the students weren't asking, in most instances, you're right, they were not asking for the moon. They were just asking for consistent access to things that were going to be working when they needed them. So, and all things that are well within what they should be able to get as a part of a quality education. So I also want to thank all of you for participating, because you all participated in the process. I know we saw a number of you who came out on multiple occasions to everything that was going on. So a deep bow to you, board members, for being active and present and visible. That made a difference in the process. So when moving forward in additional kinds of community engagement opportunities, one of the best practices is for you all to remain visible. Please, both in your decision-making capacity as Board of Education members, but also as, you know, committed community members and activists and champions, right? Your presence in those community conversations makes a difference, because people can access you, they can touch you, they can talk with you beyond the formal decision-making apparatus. The last thing that I'd like to say here, since I don't hear any other questions, is a deep thank you to Dr. Adams and his team, particularly Deputy Superintendent Willis and others. There is no way that we could have done, what was it? How many events is on the, at a certain point I lost track because there were so many, but there were 12 or 18 or 13. There's just no way that we could have done all of those events in 3 weeks time, 3.5 weeks time, without the backbone capacity of the district in doing communication and outreach and all of the setup and all of the things that were required to be able to execute with fidelity on each one of these engagement opportunities. So I do very much want to emphasize, I appreciate your gratitude and thanks to us. I want to turn around and offer a deep bow and thanks to Dr. Adams and team for providing the backbone capacity that made it happen in such a short period of time.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you.
everything.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Board, there's one more presentation that is going to be provided by the CPN tonight. That is going to be Mr. Jay Hartman and Dr. Priscilla Dowden White, Professor UMSL, who is also the board chair for the CPN. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Mr. Hartman and to Dr. Priscilla Dowden White. Ready whenever you are. Mr. Hartman, ready whenever you are. Dr. Dowden White, I think.
I'm here. Oh, there Jay is.
Yeah, Mr. Hartman, ready whenever you are.
Yep.
It looks like he's frozen.
It does. Can you carry on, Dr. White, without him for right now?
I will.
All right.
First, I'd like to say good evening to the board members and to everyone who is in attendance this evening. As president of the Consortium Partnership Network Board, I'm delighted and honored to have this opportunity to introduce myself to you and to share with you why I, along with the CPN Board of Directors, are so invested in the success of this initiative. I'm honored to serve on the CPN board along with Mr. Marcus Robinson, who is the Vice President, and Ms. Vivian Corbin, who is the parent representative, Ms. Susan Jones, of course, who is on the school board, and Dr. Adams, our superintendent. Can you advance to the next couple of slides, please? Okay, thank you. Each member of the CPN board brings a distinctive wealth of knowledge, expertise, and unique insight to this process. And I'm particularly grateful to have the opportunity to learn from them as we work together to guide the consortium in implementing a bold educational strategy aimed at providing resources for students where they are needed most and empowering teachers in the decision-making and accountability process in the schools where they teach. By incubating scalable change for neighborhood schools, we hope to identify best practices that might be scaled up to the district level where possible and desirable. May I have the next slide, please? Thank you. As an educator for over 30 years and counting in the field of higher learning, I'm a witness to the fact that you can teach skills, but the driving force by which a person decides on and initiates action, that is one's will to teach and one's will to learn, is not something that can be explicitly taught. The will of both educators and students can only be substantively motivated and nurtured in a culture that values creativity and innovation, transparency, and finding a way to accomplish those things which appear to be unreachable or even impossible. The CPN theory of action aims to promote interrelated and interdependent shifts in practice of leadership teams and staff and in school culture, which serve to build a capacity of leadership team and staff and result in improving learning experiences for students. As this process takes place, transformation takes place. Providing meaningful and protected school level autonomy is key to providing an environment for transformation to happen. With autonomy over budget, staffing, schedule, curriculum, and culture, leaders and educators at the school level can create an environment tailor-made for the needs of their unique set of students. The word partnership is key. It's a key CPN value. For the success of empowerment zones rest on partnership, especially those partnerships between local schools and neighboring communities, between principals and teachers, between public and private funders, and the partnership between the CPN and district boards. The realization of these partnerships requires something that historically we as St. Louisans have struggled with. We have struggled to build trust. There are plenty of good reasons for the lack of trust where it exists in our communities. And even right here, perhaps in this virtual space we occupy here this evening. We have history in this city that would cause one to wonder if the CPN is an educational initiative aimed solely at trying to transform struggling schools, or is it just a new brand of takeover? When I was invited to talk about the possibility of my joining the CPN board, as I read the overview of the CPN, a flag went up for me when I read how the initiative aims to offer an alternative way to support schools that ensures local control and teacher voice while leveraging district expertise and implementing charter school-like autonomies. Since I am not an advocate of charter schools in place of public schools, and I have no interest in being a part of a charter school effort, I had to find out what is meant exactly by charter-like autonomies. Whereas charter schools work from the principle of here's the bar, now beat it, meet it, or beat it, a key value which empowerment zone schools seek to communicate to students and their families is that every child who comes through the door should be there, deserves to be there, and that their neighborhood school is a place where something transformational is going to take place that will serve our children and our communities well. From one perspective, what the St. Louis Public School District is seeking to do through the Consortium Partnership Network is lofty. Some might even say it's utopian. But for anyone who is intimately involved in the education of our children, we know that what we are striving for is nothing more than what our children deserve. I thank you for inviting me and Mr. Hartman here to speak to you this evening. I'm delighted that I finally have an opportunity to greet you and introduce myself. And I look forward to us getting to know one another better and working together on behalf of our children. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Dowden-White. Ms. Van Noy, if you could advance to the next slide, please. I appreciate as well being able to have an opportunity. So tonight I want to share some of the things that the CPN schools have done in this past school year, some of the outcomes that we know of as of now, and then I'll briefly touch on some of the adjustments that the schools have made as a result of COVID, and then talk about the priorities for next year as well. Next slide, please. The first and biggest step that the CPN schools took was to create teacher-informed 3-year improvement plans. And the impact that these improvement plans has had is to create a more visible and more public accountability for school improvement, which is a good thing. Teacher leadership teams have the ability to revise and measure their goals and their distance from their goals each year, and take an active role in planning the new goals and the new program for the following year. The impact that this has had is that it's gotten more investment from the teacher leadership teams, and they take more ownership of the process, but there's still a clear need for more capacity building of teacher leadership teams. That's one of the biggest takeaways that we've had from this year so far. If you advance the slide, there's a couple examples of what these plans look like. So the first one is from Ashland, and then if you could advance to the next one, it's just from Merrimack. This just gives you an example of the details that the teams have gone into in their 3-year planning process. Next slide, please. Another way that CPN schools have used their autonomy in this past year was investing in a new reading curriculum. And this curriculum allowed for teachers to have tightly aligned lesson plans in hand that are connected to knowledge-based curriculum, and have worked hard to push real-world experiences with that knowledge-based curriculum. It's also created a lot more opportunities for writing across all content areas. We've seen this as a really positive shift. It's also illuminated more of a need for teachers to get professional development around the science of reading, which is what the reading curriculum is based on. And so we have plans to be able to do that actually remotely over the summer and then into the next school year. So teachers are excited about that opportunity. Next slide, please. CPN schools have also been thinking more about the relationship between curriculum and assessments and professional development. So there's a little chart on this slide that kind of talks about how those are all interrelated. But this year, CPN schools had a little bit more flexibility with the types of assessments and the frequency of assessments that they took. And they were able to use that flexibility to do less of one assessment, more of another, and more tightly align the way that students were being assessed to what they were being taught, and then aligning the teacher professional development to that in order to more effectively learn how to differentiate for kids. This was a really positive takeaway, but we also realized that we need to deepen this effort. We all know that sometimes too much assessment and too much testing can be a really negative thing for kids and teachers. And so we take that opportunity to learn about what kids are learning very seriously, and we don't want to over-test kids. We want to be teaching them rich, deep instruction and learning what does and doesn't work, and then adjusting instruction from there. So that's how those are related and how the CPN schools are thinking about that. Next slide, please. The last thing that I'll share, and this is not an exhaustive list of all the activities that the schools have done this year, but just kind of quick highlights. So the last input from this year that I'll share about is around the community convener meetings that the schools have had. They've had monthly meetings with school leadership and outside nonprofits or faith-based partnerships in each of the neighborhoods that are represented by Ashland and Merrimack. And we see this as a really important way to connect families of the students as well as staff members with better resources. And we know that in order to make academic progress for kids, we have to slow the student mobility trends that we see, slow the student attrition trends that we see. And so taking the steps to intentionally build up the village around the schools is a step in that direction. And we've seen some good success in that so far this year. If you could advance the slide, please. A few outcomes just to share. And again, this is not exhaustive, and some of the data that it's sharing is pretty incomplete because we had such an abrupt stop to the school year in March as a result of COVID. But you'll see that the overall 90/90 attendance data from March of 2019 to March of 2020 was improved at both campuses. Merrimack saw a pretty significant increase in enrollment. Ashland's enrollment has slipped a little bit. Those could be as a result of trends in the neighborhood. So even with Ashland having a few less students enrolled, it could be the case that the neighborhood lost a really significant number of elementary age students. Those are questions that we don't know about. We're encouraged by the trend of increased enrollment at Merrimack. A couple things to pull out of school culture outcomes. Students all took Panorama survey in the fall. At both schools, the engagement rate is an area of relative strength, yet rigorous expectations was self-identified by students as a way that both schools needed to improve. So that's being incorporated into the teachers' improvement plans, school-wide improvement plans. One piece of data to consider that I mentioned earlier is around the number of students in transition and the student mobility rate. There's a range between 10 and 20% of families that are in transition, and oftentimes as high as 40% or even higher mobility rate. And so the number of students that are coming in and out of these schools each year can be really high, and it makes it very challenging to get traction around academic or even just building positive relationships between teachers and students when there's such a high turnover rate. Next slide, please. Couple academic outcomes just to point out. These are primarily bright spots. In reading, you can see that kindergarten, 4th and 5th grade at Merrimack were above average, and this is above average for district growth. Remember, these schools were identified to be part of CPN and have historically been pretty low performing schools, even within the district. So above average district growth, while it's not anything to settle into and be comfortable with, it is demonstrating some growth, and we're excited about that. At Ashland, you see the same thing in 2nd and 4th grade for reading outcomes, and in math, 4th grade is above average at both schools. So next slide, please. If you kind of think of the fourth grade at both campuses as a bit of a case study. We wanted to look at what was leading to those successes, and there was actually some common trends. So we noticed that teachers in fourth grade tended to be looping with their cohorts of students. There was a highest rate of student retention from third grade to fourth grade, and I don't mean retained in the academic retention of like repeating a grade. I mean the highest number of students in that cohort moved from third grade to fourth grade in those schools. And then there was a really high fidelity of curriculum implementation in those grades. And so when you combine those three factors, teacher retention, student retention, and consistent curriculum, it does lead to a high rate of student success. We'll admit that this combination is still far too rare, but there are absolutely some bright spots to uncover there. And so we're proud of that. Next slide, please. This is some brief data on what the response to COVID has looked like since March. We've had 85% plus of families respond to the technology needs surveys at both schools. So a really high rate of engagement there, and a relatively high rate of total engagement from families. If you combine synchronous and asynchronous learning, 70% plus. We've seen a consistent challenge with the daily and weekly logging in for synchronous classes, however, and the staff has worked really hard to close that gap, but we're still seeing it a difficult uphill battle with getting kids and students able to log into daily class. Some of the key learnings that we've seen as a result of this are that teachers and staff and students have learned a lot about online instruction, and there's some challenges to that, but there's also a potential for being able to apply some of those lessons learned when school starts back up in August. Next slide, please. So the last thing I'll share is a few of the priorities for next year, and you should see that these will align to some of the key learnings that I've already shared. Strategic teacher looping and focus on student retention is a key focus at both campus. Improving the instructional coaching model by adding a reading and math specialist coach. Formalizing leadership professional development through the TLI network. Improving joy through problem-based learning units aligned to the reading curricula, doubling down on those real-world learning opportunities. And then finally, looking for innovative uses of technology based on the adjustments that have been made in COVID. There are a lot of opportunities to differentiate learning, whether it's in person or online, with the new skill set that everyone has as a result of the adjustments we've made in the last couple of months. So that's it for the quick share. Would love to take any questions as you have them.
Hi, Mr. Hartman. This is Dr. Roberts.
Hi, Dr. Roberts.
Can I take you back to page 14?
Yes.
And at the very top, where you indicated that fourth grade had the highest math and reading star results,
mm-hmm.
Do you have the pre and post information somewhere?
This was just,
how is that?
Yeah, this was just fall to winter data. We don't have spring data because students haven't been going to school in person, and so they haven't taken a spring end of course STAR test, but this is really just fall to winter growth data. So
okay, so the fall is the pre part,
mm-hmm.
and the winter is the post information.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And on to page 15, I think I heard you say that you're tracking who logs into the computers. You have a way of doing that?
Teachers in each school has been using their own sort of spreadsheet to track students by class. And so teachers, they have call logs where they've set up and communicated when they're talking to families about getting them set up with technology. And then teachers are running the day-to-day synchronous lessons, class meetings, and then anyone who isn't on the certified teaching staff or is in a support staff role, they work to make phone calls and reach out to families who haven't been connected in those daily lessons. So that they're tracking that on their own. And there are ways to pull that data from the number of engagements in Microsoft Teams or ClassDojo. But for the most part, they've been tracking that on their own.
Okay, so is that reference to children who have access to technology and don't use it, or they don't have the technology?
There are examples of both. There are
Okay.
some families that there's a small percentage of families that haven't been able to procure the technology, even with the district being willing to, share that. It's been difficult to track down every single family. I think some families have moved to different living situations as a result of COVID, and maybe it's out of the district temporarily. The other challenge that has been faced is folks who do have the technology but are not able to consistently log in on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, and my final question is on page 16. And it's the third bullet that indicates adding reading and math specialist coaches. Is that something that's coming out of the CPN budget, or is that something the district would be responsible for?
That is actually something that both schools are looking to use. They have some short-term comprehensive budget from the state. That's through the federal ESSA money. And so they're trying to use those supplemental teachers to focus on supporting the instructional practices of math and reading teachers. And so using those additional dollars creatively. So it's through essentially Title I dollars.
Okay, the district dollars.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
thank you. Thank you.
So I want to go back to the slide about the mission for the CPN. I am really encouraged and excited by this idea of like incubating change for neighborhood schools, and this idea of scaling it up to be of a benefit to the full district and all students. And I just wanted to point out that I appreciate how intentional you are about naming that as part of your mission, because kind of it feels very much in alignment with what we were just talking about with the Emerging Wisdom Report, that there, at least from the people who came out to our sessions, there's just like a deep longing for a reinvestment in neighborhood schools. And so I think, seeing in the Merrimack and Ashland communities, these ways of making change, how they can be scaled up and brought back to the district as a whole. And so really looking for opportunities to identify those strong practices that you all are implementing, and then just following along or keeping us updated on that progress to try to do that at scale in the schools that are not in the CPN. That's really exciting to me. And I also, the comments that you made about attrition and how stabilizing enrollment really feeds into like this bigger picture of student outcomes and student achievements. I think extrapolating that to a bigger picture of also like the feeder patterns and how that just stabilizes the district and neighborhoods and school communities in general is all really very positive.
Thank you. Yeah, we really hope that to be able to find out what works, and if there are things that can be scaled, we want to certainly be supportive of more than just 2 schools wherever possible. So thank you.
If there are no other questions at this time, President Lowe.
I have no, is there any other board members that have questions for Mr. Hartman or Dr. Dowden-White?
Yes. Thank you both for the presentation. I had a couple questions. Let's see which slide. I guess first, thank you, Ms. Dowden White, for your service, and thank you for sharing your experiences. I will say, however, I think it's a little capricious to apply a blanket statement to all charters being meet it or beat it, but that is your experience. For Jay, I wanted to know, on slide 6, you said that it says that one of the key takeaways is that continuous need for capacity building of the leadership teams. What specific areas of capacity building? Or in what ways do you see the need for that capacity building?
I would say a couple different ways. One is working collectively as a team to make decisions. It is decidedly different to decentralize or flatten the leadership model at a school. Typically, schools are run through what the principal wants to do, and principal is usually taking directions from central office. And so this is, you know, the theory of action is to do something different and empower teachers at more of a local school level. And that is a new experience for most teachers as well as principals. And so there are plenty of opportunities for growing in learning how that works and how to come to consensus and make decisions and execute on those decisions and follow up. So that's one. And then the other one is more, so I'd say like kind of adaptive leadership there. And then there's opportunity for more technical leadership around having a teacher-based mentor or coach. Like, so if I'm a reading specialist coach and I'm going in and I'm helping advise other reading teachers, not in an evaluatory capacity, but in more of a teacher mentor capacity, there are lots of skills that can be developed there and training that will benefit the school in their growth. So great question.
And so then the part B to that, because I do have a question on 10, but the part B to that, in terms of that capacity building and what teachers need, what the leadership team might need, do you think that there might be a way to, just thinking about how we approach this systemically, a way that from your experience thus far this year, seeing how we can infuse that into our search process for teachers? So do you think there are different types of applicants we might be looking for in our teaching staff? Yes, highly qualified teachers, but also coming with a set of skills and mindsets that lend to this. I know that's a leading question, but.
No, I think that's fine. I think we are faced with challenges of recruiting teachers regardless. And so I might rephrase your question as, how do we consider retaining the teachers that we do have and making their workspaces an attractive place to stay and be at long-term? And I think one of the ways to do that is to give teachers more of a say-so in the big decisions that schools make. And by empowering them, we hope that that will make it a long-term place where they feel comfortable being, because they're bought in and they have a little bit more skin in the game. And so, but that takes some retraining, and that takes some capacity building opportunities. So I do think I would love it if we were faced with the situation of we have too many applicants and we get to filter out for people who are going to have more of a team first mindset. But right now it's more about trying to tilt the scales towards keeping everyone and trying to reframe how people think about leadership teams, that people that are already in the buildings. So.
Thank you. And so leading into my second question then, on page 10, just around PD and assessment, nothing super specific to look at, but just thinking about that exact concept. So if we are using the pool that we have and trying to bring it to speed with this, even if we wanted to apply this concept to other schools without making every school a CPN school, do you think that the training in PD that, I don't know, it's a yes or no, but do you think the training in PD that these two schools are using would be effective in our other schools? That would be part A, and then part B would just be, what do you think what are the differences that you notice between PD that's happening within the CPN schools and PD in the district as a whole?
I'll answer the first question and then think through the second one as well. In short, I do think it can be effective. We saw some examples of that this year where other schools in the district wanted to opt into the assessment pilot. It wasn't just CPN schools. And so that was met with some mixed success, depends on who you ask, who they may have appreciated that autonomy, they may not have. And I think that we learned a lot in the first year of what did and didn't work. And so I wouldn't say that it would automatically be more or less successful than what other schools are doing. If there's a level of buy-in from teachers and principals, then it absolutely can be. And I think that's what that's the formula for success at CPN schools, is that it's coming from the desire from the teachers and the staff, and then they're owning that and finding, going out and finding the professional development opportunities to align to their school goals. So I think that's really critical. Without that mutual buy-in, then I wouldn't make a blanket statement and say that it will be better for other schools. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
This is Dr. Dowd White. I'd like to just comment on Mr. Lane's comment about what I said specifically relating to charter schools. If I communicated this as a blanket statement, and I can understand why it came across that way, that was not my intent. However, I do want to stress and emphasize the point that I was attempting to make if I did not make it clearly enough. And this comes not just from my opinion, but also we can look at data to back this up. One of the gifts, I think, of the public schools that we don't explicitly communicate all the time is that the public schools are not the last place that parents and families should seek for educating their children. It should be the first place that they seek for educating their children. And that's not always communicated, and we understand why. The other piece of this is that not only do we see operating in many charter schools, in many private schools, and when I say this, I'm not speaking against these schools. My husband and I were both products of the St. Louis Public Schools, Williams Elementary and Beaumont High School. And I've gone to and graduated from the best institutions of higher learning this country has to offer. And so I know what the public schools of St. Louis can produce. When we made the choice to send our daughter, our only child, to Cardinal Ritter College Prep, that was a hard choice that we, and she's 38 now, but when she was a teenager and we had to make that choice and we were buying our home and we wanted to buy a home in the city and we wanted our child to experience the education that we had experienced in the St. Louis Public Schools. We did not want to send her a message that she had to go out of the community. She had to be sent out of the community to receive excellent education. And frankly, we also wanted her to go to school with African-American children. And we chose Cardinal Ritter College Prep. So this is not an indictment against charter schools and private schools. But what the point that I'm trying to make is that in private schools, students have to meet certain standards to get in. What I'm saying about the not only the opportunity that public schooling provides, but we need to create and nurture and make sure that there is the impression that is backed up by what children receive in the public schools, that it's an honor for you to be in this school. And that's what we are working toward in Merrimack and Ashland. We want parents to desire for their children to go to Merrimack and Ashland. So again, Mr. Lane, I completely understand how the way I communicated that gave that impression. But it's important to me that you know and that the board knows that that was not the impression that I was trying to give. And I thank you.
Are there
I
any more-
just,
I'm sorry, Ms. Miller, go ahead.
oh, no problem. I just wanted to say how much I appreciate that that the CPN president finds the value in traditional public schools.
Thank you. I think I just want to add one other caveat here. Last year when the CPN started, we had detailed negotiations with Local 420, and they at that point in time were not willing to engage. I've received a letter over the last 30 days from the president of Local 420 that for the next school year, they plan on engaging with the CPN in terms of the leadership team being part of what they will be supporting. So I think that is a caveat to this leadership development or leadership lens or leadership autonomy, because they see some value in the fact that teachers are going to be empowered and making decisions at the local level and quite frankly, creating an MOU such that that can occur. So I just wanted to provide that information, new information to the board. Obviously it's not confirmed yet, but a letter did come from them indicating that they're willing to have some conversation about being much more closely linked to the leadership team and the decisions that the leadership team will be making moving forward. So thank you, Dr. Dowden White, and thank you, Mr. Hartman, for your presentation. Dr.
Dr.
Roberts?
Adams?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. This question is more for you than for Mr. Hartman. And I certainly appreciate the presentation on the CPN. And I just want to know what the kind of autonomy that we're giving to the CPN. Has there been any consideration to devoting that same kind of autonomy to other schools in the district? And I say that because there was school-based management before there was CPN. And so it all sounds the same to me, and maybe I've been around too long, but what's the clear definition between allowing schools to be school-based management versus CPN?
I think the difference, first of all, thank you for the question. I think the difference is there's an independent board. The school-based management doesn't have an independent board. But to your point, I think some of the lessons learned in this effort will, I don't want to use the word create, but possibly return some of our schools to a deeper school-based management kind of system or identity, if you will. So I think it's, frankly, it's a similar piece than what you're used to. We started pilot schools with the same kind of idea 10 years ago when I got here, and they kind of dissipated. That this is a bringing them back in the way that there will be some independent board that likely will be making some decisions, or if not making some decision, influencing what occurs at the school site level. So I think there's a close correlation between school site management and what the CPN is doing around the leadership autonomy that they're talking about. Did that answer your question, Dr. Roberts? It didn't?
We'll talk.
Okay, all right. Any other questions? Hearing none, thank you very much, Dr. White and Mr. Hartman. One last presentation. The board asked me to give them an update around the school restart and what we were doing in that space. Ms. Van Noy, if you don't mind going to the school restart task force, I'll walk through this rather quickly. Ms. Van Noy, if you can hear me. Thank you. So the purpose of the task force obviously is to think about what happens at the beginning of the 2020-21 school year. And a task force has been created. The task force members are composed of co-chairs Susan Reed, Karen Johnson, who is a parent. I'm sorry, not a teacher. Addie Bond, a parent, and Square Watson, a central office employee. There are 5 committees that are tasked with looking at governance, and governance in the sense that they are providing some oversight to this committee, not governance in the sense of taking over governance from the district in any way, shape, or form. A wellness committee, Mr. Brown and Megan Marietta are the chairs, Paula Knight around instruction, facilities and operations, Square Watson, and technologist Cheryl Van Noy. But the notion here is that we're looking to develop and present a set of recommendations and considerations that the school district will look at in terms of implementing a smooth transition to the beginning of the 2020-21 school year in light of what's going on around the COVID-19 virus. Next slide, please. The members of the task force, I won't go through all of them. 3 were recommended by the union. 3 were recommended from the Network Superintendents for Principals. Well, I think there are 4 or 5 for that. And also the Parent Association, PAC, recommended some persons as well. So these are the persons who are leading this effort or responsible for providing feedback to me as we look at the recommendation for what might happen. Timeline. Next page, please. The groups are meeting bi-weekly. We started meeting 2 weeks ago. The task force meets bi-weekly every Thursday at 3:30. The subcommittees meet the opposite weeks that we are meeting. The first set of work group recommendations will come back to the board in June. It's my intent at the June board meeting to provide the first set of recommendations. The second set of recommendations will be, a work group recommendations will come hopefully to the board in your work session in June. And then the final set of recommendations will come back to the board in July. It is likely between this time, we will be setting up some meetings such that the community could give us feedback. All of our recommendations obviously will be impacted by the City of St. Louis Health Department and the requirements of the recommendations they may make for what happens at the beginning of next school year. Next, please. As I indicated, there are weekly conference calls that are taking place with the city health director, the charter school liaison representative, independent school representative, and the Catholic school representative, because this is not just about the St. Louis Public Schools, but it's about kids in general who attend schools in the city of St. Louis. So we're at the table Wednesday at 8 o'clock in the morning, talking about ideas or strategies such that we are all sharing the same amount of information and getting best practices. Education Plus has a superintendent Zoom meeting that will be taking place tomorrow at 10 o'clock. as we talk about, not just in the city of St. Louis, but across the region, what ideas that people are bringing to the table relative to what happens at the beginning of next school year. Lastly, charter sponsor district collaboration that has a goal of pursuing the highest quality education opportunities in the city of St. Louis. We understand the work is intertwined, so we are working with our charter school partners as well as sponsors to talk about how we can align. There are three key areas that have come out of this notion around technology and broadband. We all are suffering in that space. The transportation inefficiencies that are out there because we are spending a lot of dollars to transport kids from one point to another. And this whole notion around school growth, consolidation, and saturation. So a project manager will be appointed that the committee will select over the next 2 or 3 weeks, with the idea that this person will be working with the charter school liaisons, the sponsors or universities, and the district around collaboration, with the idea that a recommendation will come out in December or sometime before the end of the fiscal year, before the calendar year, around what we need to be looking to share, consolidate in a way that it can impact every student and kid in the city. While that will not impact the beginning of the year, that will impact some ideas that might look at this notion around technology and other kinds of things. So I want to give the board some quick update. I don't have any recommendations for you at this point in time because committees are still talking and sharing. There were questions that came from you, meaning from the board, that I've dispersed to the subcommittees, and the subcommittees are looking at all of the recommendations or ideas that you provided to the board chairperson that we are looking at. So it's premature right now to come back with any kind of recommendations, but my hope is at the board session in June, I will come back to you with what does a scenario look like if all students are coming back to brick and mortar? What does a scenario look like if we're hybrid? What does a scenario look like if all kids have to wear masks? What does a scenario look like if all kids have to have their temperature taken? What does it look like if a scenario is this, that we have to do social distancing on a bus when you have a bus packed with 50 kids? So we're looking at all of these scenarios. What does it look like if every kid does not have technology? What does it look like if we have to come back or we don't come back at all in August, which might happen? So again, we're looking at this from a holistic perspective. We have a lot of people at the table, and these groups are going to get larger, at least the subcommittees, as more people come to the table. Right now, the president is a member of the governance committee. I will welcome any other board member who might want to be a participant in any of the subcommittees. All of our meetings are done by Zoom once a week, and so you can listen in if you want to, or you can participate if you would like to as well. So any questions relative to the School Restart Task Force that we have put together to look at this?
Well, Dr. Adams, thank you for the invitation to listen in and or participate. I'm on page 4, and
Yes,
it's very general. So if I wanted to participate, I would need some specific times and links in order to do that.
Not a problem at all. I'll send you an email tomorrow with the details of when the meetings are going to be held, and they're all done by Zoom, similar to, the bottom line is I'll invite you to any meeting that you would want to be part of as it relates to the subcommittee or the overall task force.
So you'll send specific day and time of the Zoom meeting in
Yes,
that
ma'am.
email. Thank you.
Yes. The overall task force meets on Thursday at 3:30, which is on page 4. The individual subcommittee meetings, I can get you those as well because they just set those over the last week.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Last document for me, Mrs. Van O, if you don't mind, just the last superintendent's report. This was supposed to be at the beginning of the meeting, but obviously I want to get into the presentations. Just some talking points that I want to share with the board. I want to say congratulations to the staff, students, and parents of Collegiate, McKinley, and Metro for being ranked as 3 of the top public high schools in Missouri by U.S. News and World Report. Collegiate ranked number 8 at CSNB, McKinley ranked number 6 and Metro was #1 statewide from this particular report. More good news from our high schools: Carnahan, Clyde C. Miller, Collegiate, Gateway STEM, and Vashon students have earned a combined $1,500 in scholarship money through their hard work sponsoring blood drives. Recipients of the scholarships will be announced at a later date. Metro, Sumner, and McKinley also held blood drives. The 8 high schools combined netted 338 units of blood. Each collected units of blood saved up to 3 lives, so potentially 1,014 lives were saved as a result of these students participating in blood drives. Great job to these students. I want to also thank the American Red Cross for their work in partnering with our students to provide them the opportunity to make a difference in our community. Next, I want to also, we also received some exciting news from Fontbonne University. Northwest Academy of Law senior Stephen Edwards has been awarded the Fontbonne Presidential Scholarship, which includes full tuition and board for him for the next 4 years. A great honor for that student and his college advisor who works with him. Lastly, as you may know, today is International Nurse Day. Last Wednesday was National School Nurse Day. I'm excited to share that one of our school nurses, Sharon Walker from Warner Elementary, was chosen by the Post-Dispatch as one of only 10 nurses selected as the top nurse in St. Louis in the year 2020. Congratulations to Nurse Walker. As you already are aware, nurses and healthcare providers have been really doing an outstanding job in this pandemic in terms of supporting what's happening in our community and what's happening in hospitals and also in this building, because every member who walks in this building on a daily basis gets checked by the nurse in terms of their temperature walking in this building. Lastly, friendly reminder, May 21st is the last day of school for students before break. May 22nd is a record-keeping day and the last day for 10-month employees. May 25th is Memorial Day, and the district will be closed on that day. These are announcements I'd like to give to the board and the public at this point in time. Madam President, that concludes my presentation to the board at this time.
Great, thank you. Typically, we have this portion of the meeting set aside for public comment. So in this virtual setting, I wanted to read to you the way we've been handling that. The Board of Education is committed to receiving public comments during COVID-19 pandemic and corresponding suspension of in-person public Board of Education meetings. As part of this effort, the board is inviting interested members of the public to submit written comments to the following email address prior to the start of the April 14th, 2020 meeting at slpsinfo@slps.org. Subject to the requirement that commenters exercise proper decorum and respect for individual student and employee privacy, the Board of Education will assemble the written comments and make them available for review by the public via a link that will be placed on the district website alongside the link for viewing rebroadcasts of this April 14th, 2020 meeting. This procedure for submitting public comments will remain in effect until the City of St. Louis Health Department and/or State of Missouri stay-at-home orders are lifted and the Board of Education returns to the normal in-person public meeting format. So that was posted as part of our public notice for this meeting. Any public comment that we received prior to the start of this meeting will be assembled and posted alongside the link for this when that becomes available at the virtual BOE page. With that, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda items? First of all, let me ask, are there any items that board members wish to take separately?
I personally do not have any items to take separately, but I do have questions on them, but I'm just prefacing with that, questions and requests, prefacing with that because it will not affect how I vote on the items.
Do you know which items they are?
Yep, items 4, 6, 12, 25, 48, and 49. One of those we already talked about.
So just for ease of following along, I think we'll just take them separately. Are there any other board members? Okay, is there, well, I'll just do it. I move that we approve consent agenda items 05-12-2001 through 05-12-2003. Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions or discussion on those items? Ms. Lewis?
Well, I think Mr. Lang has some questions.
So he does, but not on these items, is that correct?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay,
I
That's
wanted
correct.
to try to find a way to keep us all on track.
gotcha. Thank you.
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
I am abstaining. I discussed this with the board, and some of the items in the agenda do not, in my opinion, provide enough information or evidence of their benefit to students for me to approve.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey Collins.
Yes.
The motion has passed.
Is there a motion to approve 05-12-2004?
I move that we approve agenda item 05-12-20-04.
Second, Mr. Lane?
So my question, Dr. Adams, for the SIG schools, just from my understanding, how does that renewal process work? And the purpose for my question is thinking about if these funds that are approved are to be SIG funds that are used for those schools, is there a chance that some of those schools might not be SIG schools in the future?
So these schools have one more year of funding for SIG. We just received a letter from the state indicating that collectively these schools in the district will receive about $1.7 million next year for these 5 schools. But all of the schools will be SIG schools for one more year. And if something that we will close one of the schools, i.e., I won't say a name because somebody will say I'm closing it, then those funds will go back in the state's pot, and then they will distribute to all of the schools that are considered SIG schools in the state.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further question or discussion? Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Abstain.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey Collins.
Yes.
Motion passed.
I move we approve 05-12-2005. Is there a second?
Second.
Questions or discussion? Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Abstain.
Dr. Roberts, Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey Collins.
Yes.
Motion passed.
I move we approve 5-12-2006. Is there a second?
Second.
Adam, you have a question?
Yes. So I know this one came up before. I'm just the only thing I just need is clarity if this is different from the one we approved, or is that my misunderstanding?
Yes, sir, it is different. The first was December 1st to June 30th, $39,800. And so that was a ratification. The one you're approving agenda item for July 1, December 30th, 2020. And so the last contract, the employee has indicated that they will no longer, they're not planning in the United States, they're going to relocate to Canada. And so we are looking to replace that person at this point in time.
Thank you.
So to answer your question, the previous one was for ratification for a new one starting July 1 for this fiscal year.
Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Abstain.
Dr. Roberts,
Abstain.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey Collins,
Yes.
motion passed.
I move we approve 05/12/2007 through 05/12/2011. Is there a second?
Second.
Questions or discussion? Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Abstain.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey Collins,
Yes.
motion passed.
I move we approve 5/12/2012. Is there a second?
Second.
Adam, you had a question on this one?
Yes, two things here. And this would just be a question for Dr. Adams around feasibility. So under the background information part of this item, the first line, providing temporary and direct hire technical personnel, is it possible to get a report about what percent of the hired staff are temporary and what percent are not?
Yes, I could get this report. I don't know it offhand, but I could.
I don't need it offhand. Just, it seems like it's a recurring thing. So as it just for us to have an understanding of what that is, because it says, I mean, it's a cost not to exceed it. So just knowing like what percent of that money that's set aside is being used and what percent is not, that would help just for projection purposes. And then the second thing was, I know I guess we had talked about this in a previous meeting about that information just around the reports of the MOU being helpful. Reading the last line, so, and I go through these pretty diligently, but how will the outcome be measured? And the response is consistent and constant support will be evident. My question to that is evident to whom? So if we are approving this, it won't be evident to me that there is consistent and constant support. So I personally just think that that's a little inappropriate. If there's a way that I feel like if we're hiring temporary staff and they're providing a service, there's a way for them to be evaluated, for data to be shared with the board so that we can make informed decisions about approvals.
Yeah, your comment as well as Ms. comment last week had me to go back and to work with staff around looking at the vendor reports as well as the contract reports. And so what I indicated at the last meeting, that starting in June, there will be much more detailed information and a 3-year analysis of what occurred. And so I did not exactly do that for the 5/12 one, just because I didn't have time to do so. I will be able to go to this particular item if you need it. But if you look at the one for the month of June, you will see much more detailed information, much more detailed analysis of what the goal is and how we plan on achieving it. So a point well taken and acknowledged, and you will see that moving forward. And I'll get this for you for this particular item specifically.
I just wanted to jump in and say, Dr. Adams, I really appreciate the work that clearly went into the June consent agenda. So thank you so much for pushing that.
Thank you. That's for the staff. Thank you. And I'll make the staff aware of that.
Are we ready to vote on 12?
Yes.
Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Abstain.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Abstain?
Mrs. Rhodey Collins,
Yes.
the motion passed.
I move we approve 5/12/2013 through 5, what, I'm sorry, what?
So number 25 is the one that we had previously discussed, so I no longer have a question about that one.
Okay, great. So I move we approve 5/12/2013 through 5/12/2047. Is there a second?
Second.
Questions or discussion? Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Abstain.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Brody Collins.
Yes.
The motion passed.
I move we approve 5/12/2048. Is there a second?
Second.
Questions?
Yes. So I wanted to bring this up, Dr. Adams. I know that some of our public forums, when we've had them, people have made comments about individual students getting prep books. So my question, which again doesn't have to be answered now, but can be sent later, is does this contract ensure that each individual student has their own take-homeable prep material? So that would be the first question. And then follow up to that would be, if not, is it possible for the board to be provided with what the additional cost would be to negotiate that into the contract? Or if we were to have a future contract with this vendor, what it would cost to make sure that's an additional piece?
I can get that information. I don't know. Based on what you're asking is to make sure that every senior who is taking the ACT has access to either online prep material or a text. Am I correct?
Ideally, I would say juniors and seniors, but
Mhm. Gotcha.
or
I
even
don't.
if it's knowing that there aren't usually many changes from year to year, that they can get it junior year and hopefully have it for 2 years, or something like that.
Yes, sir. I will find out. I don't, but I will back to you at the work session.
Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Abstain.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Brody Collins.
Yes.
The motion passed.
I move we approve 5/12/2049. Is there a second?
Second.
Questions?
All right, 2 questions. One, do we pay for students to take the AP exam, or do they have to pay for that on their own?
I will get your answer, Mr. Lang. I don't know.
Okay, that's all right. And then with that, I would just also just to put in a request for a report. So knowing that AP IB exams are not technically mandatory for students, but it is something that if they do take it, it goes toward our district accreditation and our report card. Just knowing of the students that we have, well, one, it would be great to know like how many students we have enrolled in AP IB courses, and then the percentage of those students that actually take it or elect to take it. And then from that, well, I guess we already get the data on their scores, but just knowing what that number is, just wanted to see if there's like a high discrepancy between whether they take it or not. And then also if we pay for that, and if we don't, knowing that those fees can accumulate, but a student could be well on their way to a 5 AP score, making sure that we can at least provide in the budget, if we don't already, to cover those costs for students.
So I just got a text. We do pay for the AP exam for those students who can't pay. So it's not a deterrent. If a family can pay it, they pay it. If they can't, we cover the cost for it. So I did get that feedback. The other 2 parts, this obviously is being recorded, so I'll roll it back and get that answer to a question for you for the next board meeting.
Okay, and I've written all this down. I can send it to you via email if that's
Yeah,
easier.
that would be great. That would be fantastic.
Ms. Lewis,
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Abstain.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey Collins.
yes.
The motion passed.
I move we approve 5/12/2050 through 5/12/2054. Is there a second?
Second.
Questions or discussion?
I had a couple of comments. I guess it was on 50 and 51. I had requested information on which bill or legislative session and state statutes mandate that we use specific vendors. The information I received back wasn't exactly thorough, but if that could be provided later, I would appreciate it. Basically, when that went into effect, why the state is allowed to tell school districts locally which vendors they must use, et cetera.
So if I'm correct regarding items, this is the state test. So the state purchases the test, and we have to purchase. This for this is the MAP assessment. That is my understanding, that they put it out for bid, and then we have to pay individually for the testing for our district. That's the MAP and EOC. So the state does the bid at the state level, and then we have to buy them for that particular bid.
So I guess how often does that go up to bid? Because the answer that I received back basically said that DRC and Questar are selected by DESE, and that is mandated. So I guess I'm confused on how often that goes up for bid, or if there's an actual state law that says that these two vendors are mandated.
I will get you that information because it's really a state issue. I don't know that it's a law or it's a process that they use. If they put it out for bid, these are the two companies that answered the bid that they approved at the state level. That we pay the cost for that particular company statewide. Every single district in the state has to use MAP and use EOC, but we pay the cost. The state doesn't pay the cost. That's the cost we pay to that. But I'll get you all the information. I think it's the Office of Administration that does the bid, but I'll get you information.
Thank you, appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Further questions on the remaining items? Ms. Lewis.
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Abstain.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey Collins.
Yes.
The motion passed.
Just as a brief reminder, to the extent possible, board members that can submit questions ahead of time really ensures that we can get you the information that you need prior to the vote. So the district has set out a process for us to get consent agenda items a month in advance. And so to the extent possible, trying to get those sent in ahead of time will make sure you get the information that you need to make your votes, and then following up on those is always possible as well. With that said, we have a few remaining items regarding policy. So there are 3 policy items before us as were put out in your board book and also via email. We've seen these a number of times, I think going back to February, for sure, March. So I'd like to take them. First one is the draft staff grievance policy. It's a 2-page document or a 3-page document. But at the top, draft staff grievance. So if we could put that one out. The goal of having and adopting these staff grievance policies is to provide a clear procedure and process for employees who have a complaint against their supervisor or their, any complaint regarding their job, but also a clear process for that to be responded to and dealt with administratively. We are obviously a school system, but we're also a large employer, and currently the district is absent a grievance policy. So this would be to bring us in line with any other employer that is of our size. So is there a motion to approve the draft staff grievance policy? This would open, a motion in a second would open it up for discussion. It does not mean you're voting yes.
Yeah, I move that we approve the draft grievance policy.
Second.
Any questions or discussion?
I have a question. I would like to know if a staff member has a complaint or held against them, will there be a form put together that they fill out so that it can be dated? Because I see you have a certain number of days that all of these actions have to occur within, so.
Yeah, so if you look at the bottom or towards the bottom on page 3, in that first paragraph under number 2, it says the grievant may file a grievance in writing on a form prepared for this purpose. And it gives the timeline for that. So if this policy is adopted, the district would create a form that would be used by the grievant to initiate the process.
So where would that form be found? Where in the principal's office or downtown? Where do they get it?
Website.
Dr. Adams or Mr. St. Omer, could you?
It will likely be on the website.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other question or discussion? Lewis? Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey Collins.
Yes.
Motion passed.
So the second one I'd like us to look at is the draft community relations policy. It's a one-page document. It's the only one-page policy that we have. So this is as it pertains to how the Board of Education would ensure open communication with students, parents, patrons, and staff, but also outlines a process for the board to engage in that type of interaction. So is there a motion to approve?
I move that we approve the communications policy draft.
Second.
Any questions or discussion? Natalie, go ahead.
Can you see me? I think it's lagging a little bit. So I just wanted to be clear on the language where it says to the Secretary of Board of Education, that's referenced in bullets 2 or numbers 2 and 3, 3 twice actually. Are we referring to the position that we elect at our officer elections, or are we referring to our custodian of records and our secretary, Ms. Lewis, who takes our minutes? I just wanted to make sure that was very clear in the language of this document.
Yes, so it is the, sure, Dr. Go ahead. Sure.
Yeah. I had that same question, and so I forwarded that question to our attorney, and it's for the board paid secretary.
Okay, so that should probably be the board administrative assistant or liaison or
It's
I'm
Miss
not
Lewis.
sure exactly
It's Miss
what
Lewis.
Miss
She's the board
Lewis's
secretary.
title is, but I would propose an amendment to the language to include that language that makes a distinction.
To Ms. Val's point and to Dr. Roberts did raise this very issue, and as I responded to Dr. Roberts, that as a part of the adoption, we would absolutely clarify, make that clarification in the policy that it is the board employed secretary versus the board officer secretary.
So do we need an amendment here? I know it shows up in quite a few places, or with just that small clarifying board employed secretary.
it's not necessary because that doesn't necessarily change the substantive policy that's being adopted. But when the policy is drafted, I will include language in that particular that clarifies it is the board employed secretary.
Great, thank you. Any other further discussion or comment? Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes. Yes.
Dr. Roberts, Mrs.
Yes.
Val, Mrs. Rhodey Collins.
Yes.
The motion has passed.
So the remaining policy up for approval, potential approval tonight is the one that says proposed replacement for P1312. And so this is I would say, Jeff, feel free to correct me if I have it wrong, but in my mind, this is an elaboration on the process outlined in the second policy that we just approved. So it goes into more detail about how a parent, student, or other member of the public would file a complaint or a grievance with the district. So the first one we did was employees. This third one we're looking at here would be for non-employees who have a concern or complaint with the district. So again, outlining a very clear process and timeline of essentially what the chain of command is and how a person would go about officially complaining to the district. So if we are to adopt this, since this is a replacement to P1312, we would first need to repeal the current P1312. Is there a motion to do that?
I move that we repeal the current policy P1312.
Second.
Any comments or discussion on the repealing of the current policy? Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey Collins.
Yes.
The motion passed.
So with that, is there a motion to approve the proposed replacement to P1312?
I move that we approve the proposed replacement for P1312.
Second.
Questions or discussion on this specific policy?
I just wanted to make the same comment where it references, at least in number 4, maybe in other places, superintendent or secretary of the board, that is clarified to mean the correct individual or position.
That will be noted and addressed if the policy is approved in the final version.
Thank you very much.
Any other further comments or discussion? Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey Collins.
Yes.
The motion has passed.
That was our last item of business. We'll move into board member reports. I'm just going to go across my screen. Dr. Roberts? Dr. Roberts, you're on.
Thank you. I just want to give a brief report on the Council of Grace City Schools, where I serve on the board of directors. And they, as you know, there are 85 major school districts across the country that participate, representing over 8 million students. And one of the pressing concerns now for all of the school districts across the country is budget cuts. And so the council is asking that all school boards join together with one voice to address their federal and state legislatures about increased additional funding for public education as they work through the 5th version of the CARE Act supplemental budget. And I have a sample that I will send out to everyone, unless Dr. Adams has that same document from the Council of Great City Schools that could be distributed. The second issue that they shared was around funding for Catholic schools and private schools. At one point, they were only receiving a portion of budget, St. Louis Public Schools budget, and that money was allocated to to students who were earmarked as delayed or in need of additional support. Now they want to fund every child that attends private schools. And so that would have a dramatic impact on public schools funding. They also went on to indicate, and one of the things that they've done is the Council of Great City Schools has entered into a legal challenge. It's called a declaratory judgment to prevent the implementation of this new funding scheme. They went on to say that the Summer Institute superintendents and their boards has been canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. They also shared that virtual learning across the country has been strained, and that it may make sense for our school boards to take a look at policies that cover unforeseen events that might precipitate closures in the future. And lastly, I think I shared this already. I'll say it one more time, that there's an excellent article on how school boards can respond to the coronavirus, and it's in the April edition of Education Week. And with that, I will close my report by recognizing the class of 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. And board members, I'm so sorry to butt in the middle of board member reports, but it was mentioned to me that I forgot to bring up the one item that Dr. Adams has asked us to move up to tonight, item 0609-2015. This was additional, provided to you in the board book. We're moving it up to tonight due to some timeline constraints. So is there a motion to approve 6/9/2015?
I move that we approve consent agenda item 6/9/2015.
Second. Any questions or discussion for Dr. Adams?
Just a quick question. Dr. Adams, we're moving from one vendor to this new vendor, or are we using both of the vendors?
Dr. Adams, you're on mute.
We had to put an RFP out, and the old vendor, which is a seller contract, ends on June 30th. So this is a new vendor. We start July 1st, and in order to be ready for virtual as early as possible, we want to try to get the contract done so we can start working with the new vendor to be prepared for July 1st.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just had a procedural question. As this is a walk-on item and it wasn't listed on the agenda, I believe I made the motion to approve and adopt the agenda. Should that be retroactively amended, Mr. St. Omer, to with the addition of this add-on item?
I think this is part of the consent agenda. It wasn't, I mean, it's in the documents for tonight's meeting because the June items are in the May consent agenda. So it does, unless I'm wrong, there doesn't need to be.
You are correct.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
I'm sorry, y'all, I'm tired. What, any further questions or discussion? Ms. Lewis? Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey Collins.
Yes.
The motion passed.
Donna, do you have a board member report?
No, I don't have a board remember. I'm sleepy too. No, I don't have a board member report, but I would like to congratulate all the graduates from kindergarten all the way up to the 12th grade. That's it.
Adam.
Yes. So the report that I have is on the ad hoc budget committee. So last time the ad hoc budget committee met, a small number of participants from the committee indicated that they would be willing to do 3 things. The main thing being looking at existing policy around the budget that the district has, working to create a new policy or policy that we would suggest to the committee. And we did that last week. We had some pretty good conversation. There are reports that will be coming to the board as soon as the full committee approves them. And then we'll send that out to everyone on the board. And then with that, I just want to thank Dr. Adams and Ms. getting us the data and information on that's necessary for.
Great. Natalie?
So I just had a few reminders. One is just tell everyone in your community to complete the census. Try to spread that word as board members and as engaged citizens. It is important for funding, for neighborhood stabilization, a number of reasons. So someone had asked me to mention that. Also, we have received a legislative update regarding specifically 3 bills that are going through actually pretty quickly. Probably tomorrow, they could be debated on the Senate floor. So please contact your legislators regarding the House Committee substitute for Senate Bill 570, Senate Bill 1540, Senate Bill 528. 528 is virtual education without much local oversight from the local board. 1540 could cost us up to $132 million and removes elements of local control, mandates charter recovery high schools, and the Senate Bill 570 actually co-opted some of the TIF reform legislation and added additional budget burdens on local districts and added provisions for charter funding. So the legislature is trying to pass all of these omnibus bills when really the only thing that they need to do right now is the budget. That is the only essential thing they need to pass. So if anyone could contact their legislators and just ask that they stick to the necessities right now, we don't need to be passing a bunch of education bills when there's not ample opportunity for public input and thoughtful amendments. So that's all I really have. And that came from our lobbyist, Mr. Steve Carroll. So you should all have that in your email, but just for the public so that you guys know what's going on, just kind of wanted to spread that information. And that's it for me.
Dorothy, you're muted.
Tracy?
Oh, nothing to report.
Susan?
Yeah, so good evening. As you guys saw earlier, the CPN board gave a report about what we've been doing for this past school year. So that's a part of my report as I serve on that board. And then also I stand with the rest of my board members in congratulating all of the graduates this school year, especially our seniors that I will not be coming back. I wish you much, much, much success in your future. And that's all.
Dr. Adams, did you have anything to add?
I just wanted to make the board aware that the state board today voted to allow districts to alter their calendar. There's a three-pronged approach to doing that. While I don't intend to do that right now, I do reserve the right to come back at a later time, depending upon what information we get from the health department relative to the timing of how kids come back to school. So I just want to make the board aware that the state did allow any district in the state for this year only to adjust their calendar. And I'll come back to the board if any recommendations are going to be made relative to that. At this point in time, not, but just want to make the board aware.
Great. So this is the last meeting while school is in session. So again, congratulations to all the graduates. Thank you to everyone, but in particular, all the teachers and principals and school-based staff that are working so hard to close out the school year for our students in these completely unprecedented times. We appreciate all that hard work. You've risen to the challenge and exceeded expectation, and just a huge thank you on behalf of all of our students for everything that you are. Last meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second, Ms. Lewis?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mrs. Val,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey Collins.
Yes.
We are adjourned.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Good
Thank you.
night.
Thank you and good night. Take care and be healthy.
Good night.